60 years ago, on December the 10th, 1948, the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It was signed in Paris. The principles were much praised at the time, but current evidence from a significant number of nations indicates that human rights continue to be abused. So what has been achieved, and where have there been failures? Here's the BBC's UN correspondent, Trevelyan.
Applause for Eleanor Roosevelt, wife of America's wartime president and the driving force behind the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
We stand today at the threshold of a great event, both in the life of the United Nations and in the life of mankind. This Universal Declaration of Human Rights may well become the international Magna Carta of all men everywhere.
She should not be forgotten.
Brian Urquhart remembers that as a defining moment. He just joined the United Nations, hoping to create a better world after seeing for himself the Nazi concentration camp at Belsen.
I think anybody who'd taken part in the war would certainly feel very strongly. And I think also right at the end of the war, the disclosure of the concentration camps and the horrors of that had a huge popular effect, especially in Europe. And from being a kind of rather wispy idea, it became something that people really thought ought to be done.
60 years after it was adopted, the Universal Declaration remains an important symbol. It can't stop human rights abuses, but it does provide an ideal standard that governments can be measured against. Everyone has a right to freedom of religion, so says the Universal Declaration. Yet religion has become a fault line when it comes to human rights. The fundamental disagreement is whether religion should be protected, specifically Islam, from language which is considered offensive, or if that actually undermines freedom of expression. Just one of the protests by Muslims insulted by the Danish cartoons about the Prophet Muhammad. This anger is channeled at the United Nations into calls for the defamation of religion to be prevented.
The question of defamation of religions and intolerance, these are the kind of subject matters which have been seized of here in the United Nations. And I think Islamophobia in particular has been something that we've been very much concerned about, as we would be if there were other expression of intolerance towards other faiths as well.
But Western countries say rights belong to individuals, not to religions.
I wouldn't like to single out any one religion. I don't think it's reasonable to single out a religion. I think what we need are standards that apply for all religions, and actually the Universal Declaration of Human Rights embodies those standards and those values very effectively.
Yet Pakistan's ambassador is concerned that freedom of expression can mean the freedom to be abusive about religion.
Would you like me to stand up at your parents' house every morning and stand outside and say freedom of speech and say your parents are da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, every morning bellow it in their ears and walk away? Would that be freedom of speech? I think that would be a violation of others' human rights.
The United Nations is full of symbols which seek to uphold human rights. Yet in a divided world, human rights is a political arena. 60 years after the Universal Declaration, there's some way to go before the dreams of its creators can be realised. Trevelyan, BBC News at the United Nations in New York.